London, a city defined not just by its history.
Before we step into the fog-thick streets of 1880s London, I need to tell you something. What you're about to experience was crafted with artificial intelligence, a machine helping us understand how another machine, the city itself, was born. If you're fascinated by how the past shapes every street corner you walk today, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss where we're going next. Now close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you can hear it. The relentless hammer of hooves on cobblestone, the guttural shouts of costermongers hawking spoiled vegetables at dawn, the grinding wheels of carts loaded with bleeding meat, the whistle of steam engines cutting through human voices like a knife. This isn't background noise. This is the operating system of the world's first true megacity, a place where 7 million people learn to move, breathe, work, and survive inside a mechanism that never stopped, never slept, and never apologized for crushing those who couldn't keep pace. Victorian London wasn't a city. It was a pressure cooker, a biological experiment, a training ground for every modern metropolis you've ever navigated. And here's what most history books won't tell you: you're still living inside its blueprint. Every subway system that swallows you at rush hour, every hidden labor force that stocks your shelves at 3 a.m., every district where danger is managed rather than solved, all of it traces back to the wet, dark, desperate streets of a city that learned to weaponize flow itself. Covent Garden at 4 in the morning, January 1885. There's no dawn yet, just gas lamps throwing sickly yellow pools across mountains of produce already rotting at the edges. You're a market porter, and you've got maybe 90 minutes before the vegetables you're hauling become worthless. Not reduced in price, worthless. The entire economic logic of this space revolves around perishability, and perishability has no patience. This wasn't a marketplace designed for browsing or contemplation. Covent Garden was a velocity engine. Farmers' carts thundered in from Kent and Essex starting at 2 a.m., their drivers half asleep, but racing against every other cart on the road, because arriving 10th instead of first meant watching your asking price collapse. By 4:30, wholesalers were already moving through the stalls like sharks, fingers jabbing into cabbages, noses hovering over strawberries, voices locked in a verbal calculus that computed freshness, quantity, and desperation in real time. And the porters, men balancing 100-pound baskets on their heads, they moved in currents. Not lines, currents. They'd learned the rhythms, the gaps, the microsecond openings between carts and stalls where a loaded man could slip through without collision. One hesitation, one moment of spatial miscalculation, and you'd go down. Your load would scatter. Your wages would evaporate. Someone else would step over you and keep moving because the market had no pause button. The brilliance, if you can call it that, was how the space itself taught you. Wide enough for multiple cart lanes, but narrow enough that traffic naturally compressed. Voices had to project over constant din, so pricing became theatrical, performative, a competition of vocal authority. Threepence for the lot and I'm robbing myself wasn't advertising, it was survival communication in an environment where visibility lasted seconds. And here's what strikes me most. Nobody designed this efficiency. Nobody sat in an office and optimized the flow patterns. The market evolved them. The pressure of time and perishability and competition carved pathways into human behavior the way water carves canyons into stone. By the 1880s, Covent Garden moved more produce per square foot than any market in the world, not through planning, but through brutal, unforgiving, natural selection of technique. You either learned to read the market's rhythm, the surge at 5 a.m. when restaurants sent buyers, the lull at 6:30 when only desperate housewives remained, the final frenzy at 7 when anything unsold went for pennies, or you starved. Speed wasn't a competitive advantage. Speed was the cost of entry. Now walk with me to 7 Dials, where 7 narrow streets converge on a single point like spokes on a broken wheel. Stand at the center, if you can find space, and try to see what's coming. You can't. The angles are too sharp, the buildings too close, the crowds too dense. Sightlines extend maybe 20 feet before a corner swallows them. This wasn't accidental obscurity. 7 Dials was a Stuart-era development that created a geometry of compression, and by the Victorian period, that compression had evolved into a complete ecosystem. The inability to see around corners meant constant near collisions, which meant constant deceleration, which meant people naturally clustered at decision points. And wherever people cluster, informal economies bloom. Street vendors positioned themselves at the maximum point of traffic confusion, right where pedestrians had to slow down to navigate the intersection. Pickpockets worked the same locations for the opposite reason. Compressed crowds meant compressed attention, and compressed attention meant opportunity. The police called 7 Dials the rookery and treated it as ungovernable, but that wasn't quite accurate. It was governed, just not by official authority. Local residents developed diagonal movement patterns, cutting across traffic flows at angles that seemed reckless to outsiders, but were actually perfectly calibrated to the rhythm of carts and pedestrians. They learned which corners had blind approaches, which times of day brought which types of traffic, where to stand when a wagon turned too fast. It was knowledge that couldn't be taught, only absorbed through years of daily negotiation. Meanwhile, outsiders, anyone who didn't know the system, disrupted everything. They'd stop to look at street signs that didn't exist. They'd hesitate at intersections, blocking flow. They'd walk in straight lines when the space demanded curves, and the locals could spot them instantly, not by clothing, but by movement. An outsider was someone who fought the geometry instead of flowing through it. What fascinates me is how 7 Dials proved that spatial design isn't neutral. The shape of streets literally programs behavior. Make intersections chaotic enough, and you create a natural barrier that keeps casual visitors out while allowing insiders to thrive. The confusion becomes protection, the difficulty becomes a filter. But if you want to understand how density reshapes human existence at the cellular level, you need to stand in Whitechapel at dusk, when the lodging houses start filling, and the streets become an extension of every room too small to contain life. By 1888, Whitechapel was packing 175,000 people into a single square mile, one of the highest human densities in world history, not because of skyscrapers or vertical engineering, but through ruthless subdivision. Houses became tenements, tenements became rooms, rooms became bed spaces became shifts. A single mattress might be rented to 3 different people across a 24-hour cycle. Night worker, day worker, evening worker, each one paying 4p for 8 hours of unconsciousness. This meant privacy wasn't reduced, it was eliminated as a category of experience. Cooking happened in the street because rooms had no kitchens. Washing happened at public pumps. Hiring for dock work happened on street corners at 6 a.m., with hundreds of men mobbing foremen for maybe 20 positions. Illness couldn't be hidden because symptoms manifested publicly. Disputes couldn't be private because walls were so thin that every argument became neighborhood knowledge. And here's what most histories miss. This wasn't chaos. This was an entirely different operating system for human society. People in Whitechapel developed what we'd now call radical social awareness, an ability to read micro-signals in crowd behavior, to sense tension before it erupted, to navigate complex social hierarchies that shifted by the hour.
All right, Harry.
Women waiting in line at the water pump would exchange crucial intelligence: which landlords were evicting, which factories were hiring, which streets to avoid after dark. Men standing outside pubs weren't just drinking, they were participating in an informal labor exchange where reputation and reliability were constantly evaluated. Children running errands weren't just messengers, they were nodes in a communication network that moved information faster than any official system. The cholera outbreaks, the tuberculosis, the horrific child mortality, these were real and devastating. But focusing only on disease misses how Whitechapel's residents developed sophisticated survival strategies within an impossible situation. They couldn't change the density, so they evolved social technologies to manage it. Every Monday at 2 a.m., Smithfield Market received London's weekly sacrifice. Thousands of cattle, sheep, and pigs driven through residential streets to a 4-acre killing floor in the city's geographic heart. By dawn, the cobblestones ran red. By noon, 60 tons of meat had been inspected, butchered, and distributed to every corner of the metropolis. Smithfield wasn't barbaric, it was essential, and that's what makes it so instructive. The market operated on a principle we now take for granted: reliability trumps safety. The city needed meat delivery to be predictable, consistent, and uninterrupted. Worker injuries, and they were constant, from knife cuts to animal trampling, were acceptable costs measured against the catastrophic consequence of supply failure. If Smithfield stopped operating, London would face food riots within 72 hours. So the market optimized for continuity, not comfort. Butchers worked in 3-hour shifts because longer exposure to cold and blood and carcass weight led to mistakes. Inspectors checked for disease, but moved fast enough that inspection didn't bottleneck flow. Police monitored the perimeter not to protect workers, but to prevent theft and ensure the killing stayed contained. What strikes me is how everybody, workers, managers, city officials, customers, accepted this bargain. The market was dangerous, the work was brutal, but the alternative was starvation. And that calculus shaped everything. Complaints weren't about conditions, they were about wage theft or unfair distribution of the best cuts. The blood itself was just a Tuesday. This is Victorian London's most uncomfortable lesson. Sometimes a system's virtue is that it functions at all. We can critique Smithfield's worker safety from our comfortable distance, but the people inside it weren't stupid or oppressed into silence. They were making rational decisions within a framework where failure meant collective catastrophe. St. Catharine Docks, opened in 1828, represented a different approach entirely, controlled exchange through architectural exclusion. 23 acres, surrounded by 20-foot walls and guarded gates, where every person entering was questioned, every good inspected, every movement logged. This was London learning to weaponize access. The docks handled high-value cargo, tea, ivory, spices, wool, which meant theft was a constant threat. But rather than increase policing everywhere, the dock company created a separate zone with its own rules. Inside the walls, you had no presumptive right to be there. Employment was casual and deliberately temporary. You might work 3 days, then be excluded for 2 weeks. This prevented workers from building knowledge about security patterns or forming theft networks. The genius was making uncertainty structural. Workers never knew if they'd be hired tomorrow, which meant they couldn't plan, couldn't organize, couldn't develop the social stability that might lead to resistance. Meanwhile, goods flowed through on predictable schedules, staying inside the secure zone for the minimum possible time. The docks essentially created a border inside the city, a place where London's usual rules didn't apply, where your presence was always contingent, always revocable. And this model, the secured zone with separate governance, became the template for everything from gated communities to modern ports to the green zones in conflict areas. Then came Victoria Embankment, opened in 1870, and London learned its greatest trick: make the problem invisible and people will believe it's solved. For centuries, the Thames had been London's sewer, its disease vector, its stinking reminder that civilization was a thin veneer over waste. The embankment didn't clean the river, it buried the problem. Joseph Bazalgette's engineering marvel diverted sewage into underground interceptor sewers, moved it downstream, and dumped it into the Thames estuary where the tide would carry it away. The result was spectacular. The riverside transformed from a fetid wasteland into a Victorian promenade, linear, clean, dignified. Trees were planted, gas lamps installed, benches positioned for contemplation. The embankment became proof that London had conquered its chaos. Except it hadn't. The sewage still existed, it was just somewhere else, processed by workers no one saw, maintained by systems no one thought about. The surface became calm because the mechanism was hidden, not because pressure disappeared. This is modern urbanism's core deception. We call cities clean when we've successfully externalized their dirt. We call them safe when we've moved danger to specific districts. We call them efficient when we've made the supporting labor invisible. Every smooth subway ride depends on overnight maintenance crews you'll never meet. Every pristine supermarket depends on warehouse workers picking boxes at injury-inducing speeds. Every revitalized neighborhood is built on displaced people who can't afford what comes next. But perhaps the most cynical evolution was Leicester Square and Soho, where Victorian London discovered you could monetize fatigue itself. After 12-hour shifts in factories or markets or docks, workers didn't want inspiration or education. They wanted release. And Leicester Square provided it. Music halls, penny gaffs, gin palaces, boxing matches, peep shows, entertainment engineered for people too exhausted to demand quality. The brilliance was how it converted pressure into profit. The harder people worked, the more desperately they needed escape, the more willing they were to pay for experiences that delayed recovery rather than provided it. A night at the music hall meant sleeping less, eating worse, arriving at work depleted, which meant needing another night of escape to cope with the depletion. The district also revealed how regulation responds to visibility, not morality. Prostitution was illegal but tolerated in Soho because concentrating it made policing easier. Public drunkenness was criminalized everywhere except in designated entertainment zones where it was expected. Violence was punished harshly on commercial streets but ignored in alleyways behind theaters. What Leicester Square proved is that vice districts aren't accidents, they're pressure valves. Cities need places where rules relax, where people can transgress controlled amounts, where the rigid order of productive life temporarily dissolves. And they need those places to be profitable, manageable, and spatially contained. Victorian London didn't disappear. We just made it cleaner, faster, more efficient. We buried the labor, optimized the exploitation, and called it progress. The pressure systems are still there, we've just gotten better at hiding them. The density is still there, we've just spread it across suburbs and commuter zones. The time urgency is still there, we've just moved it from markets to delivery windows and algorithm-enforced productivity quotas. And the geography still programs behavior. Your city has its 7 dials, neighborhoods where outsiders get lost and locals thrive. It has its Whitechapel, districts where density forces communal living strategies. It has its embankment, infrastructure that works beautifully on the surface because someone else handles the ugliness below. The Victorian city wasn't an anomaly, it was the prototype, and we're all still running its software. So here's what I want you to take away. Your daily life is not separate from history, it's built on top of it. Every convenience you enjoy exists because someone, somewhere, is experiencing pressure you don't see. Every smooth system depends on rough labor you're not meant to notice. Every moment of calm is purchased with someone else's stress. When you navigate a crowded space instinctively, you're using skills Londoners developed in 7 dials. When you make rapid decisions under artificial urgency, you're responding to pressures Covent Garden perfected. When you accept that some jobs are just essential and therefore dangerous, you're repeating logic Smithfield normalized. You can't opt out of these systems, but you can see them, and seeing them changes how you move through them. Maybe you'll start noticing the invisible labor, the night shift workers, the delivery drivers, the people who make your smooth life possible. Maybe you'll question why some neighborhoods feel impenetrable and others feel exposed. Maybe you'll ask why solutions to urban problems always seem to involve moving the problem somewhere else. If this changed how you see the streets around you, hit that subscribe button. We're going deeper into the machinery next time.
To the busiest streets.